What happens when two of country music's biggest legends sit down for what should be a fun interview, only to watch the entire conversation spiral into one of the most uncomfortable moments in late-night television history? Tonight, we're breaking down the explosive clash that led to Faith Hill and Tim McGraw being escorted off Jimmy Fallon's show, and trust me, you won't believe how quickly things went south. Before we get into it, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling me which side you're on after you hear what really went down. The Tonight Show stage was set like any other night. The band played their familiar intro. The audience cheered with routine enthusiasm, and Jimmy Fallon bounced out with that trademark energy that usually keeps everything light and playful. His monologue landed, the laughs came easily, and then it was time to introduce the guests. Faith Hill and Tim McGraw, one of country music's most iconic power couples, walked out hand in hand to thunderous applause. They were there to promote their latest tour, and at first, nothing felt off. They settled into the couch, smiling and waving, while Jimmy leaned forward with his usual upbeat curiosity. He complimented how great they looked, joked about staying healthy on the road, and teased Tim about sneaking cookies when Faith wasn't looking. The audience laughed. Tim played along, and Faith smiled, correcting him with playful honesty. It was exactly the kind of relaxed banter viewers expected. For the first few minutes, everything felt easy. The chemistry was there. The tone was warm. It looked like this interview would be another harmless late-night appearance. But then Jimmy shifted gears. His tone changed just enough for people to notice, though not enough for alarm bells to ring immediately. He mentioned rumors floating around online. Nothing bad, he insisted. Just people speculating about their relationship dynamic. He referenced internet chatter claiming Faith made all the decisions while Tim simply went along with them. The moment hung in the air. Faith's smile flickered. Tim shifted slightly in his seat. Something had changed, and everyone could feel it. Faith calmly asked what rumors he was referring to. Instead of backing off, Jimmy leaned in, explaining that people analyzed interviews and body language, that someone had even made a compilation video. The studio laughter faded. Tim responded firmly, reminding Jimmy that they'd been married for decades and that their dynamic wasn't anyone else's business. Jimmy tried to soften it, calling Faith a strong woman and framing it as a compliment. But that only made things worse. Faith's smile vanished completely. She questioned what he was implying, and suddenly the audience went silent. The playful energy was gone, replaced by tension so thick it felt impossible to ignore. Jimmy attempted to laugh it off, insisting he meant no harm, but Faith wasn't buying it. She pointed out that what he called a compliment felt like an accusation, as if he were suggesting she controlled her husband. Tim gently touched her arm, but she continued, explaining they'd come to talk about their tour, to have fun, not to dissect internet gossip about their marriage. Jimmy apologized, but his apology felt rushed, more like damage control than understanding. Tim stepped in, his voice calm but firm, explaining that while they were happy to share stories, there was a line. Bringing up what random people online thought about their relationship crossed it. Jimmy nodded quickly, agreeing and apologizing again. But Faith pressed further. She asked whether he was sorry because he understood why it was inappropriate, or just because he'd been called out. That question shifted the mood entirely. Jimmy hesitated, visibly flustered, then admitted he'd been trying to be funny and relatable without considering how it might land. Faith acknowledged that was closer to a real answer, but the damage was already done. Jimmy suggested starting over and focusing on the tour. Tim responded that the issue was bigger than one question. It was the fact that Jimmy thought it was acceptable to ask it at all. Jimmy defended himself, saying personal questions were part of talk shows. Faith countered sharply, drawing a clear line between personal and invasive. When Jimmy argued that they were public figures, and speculation came with the territory, the tension escalated. Faith pointed out that respecting guests should also be part of the territory. Jimmy bristled at the word ambush, calling it dramatic, and immediately realized too late how that sounded. Faith took it as a dismissal of her feelings. Tim stood up, signaling that things were reaching a breaking point. Jimmy panicked, asking them not to end it like this. But Tim pointed out that Jimmy himself had started it by disrespecting them. The audience sat frozen, phones raised, witnessing a moment that was rapidly spiraling out of control. Jimmy apologized again and asked to take a breath, But Faith delivered a pointed response about treating guests like real human beings. Not content, Jimmy insisted he did see them that way, claiming he only raised what people were curious about. Tim shook his head, saying Jimmy clearly didn't understand. As Jimmy grew defensive, the exchange shifted from awkward to openly confrontational. Faith accused him of caring more about trends than judgment. Jimmy snapped back, admitting producers and writers were involved. That only made things worse, as it sounded like he was deflecting blame. The conversation was no longer about a bad question. It was about respect, accountability, and boundaries, and neither side was backing down. Jimmy tried to explain the process behind the show, how research and online conversations shaped interviews. Faith responded by saying it all came at their expense. What Jimmy called conversation, they saw as a setup, designed to provoke a reaction. She accused him of chasing ratings by poking at something he knew was sensitive. Jimmy denied deliberately trying to hurt them, but Tim pointed out that carelessness could be just as damaging. The studio was eerily quiet now, every word landing heavily. Jimmy asked what they wanted to happen next, clearly hoping to regain control of the situation. Faith's answer was simple. They wanted to leave. Jimmy looked stunned. He pleaded with them not to walk out, warning that it would become a huge story. Faith immediately called that out as manipulation, accusing him of prioritizing his show over genuine accountability. Tim added that they'd given Jimmy multiple chances to truly hear them, and each time, he'd made it worse. A producer signaled for a commercial break, and Jimmy asked if they could pause and cool off. For a moment, it seemed possible, but Faith firmly said no. She explained that fixing it would require pretending nothing happened, and that wasn't who they were. Tim agreed, stating they came in good faith and wouldn't participate in something that had turned ugly. Jimmy's frustration finally boiled over. He accused them of escalating things, claiming he'd only asked one question. The audience gasped. Faith responded calmly but coldly, pointing out that he'd just revealed what he really thought, that they were overreacting. Jimmy doubled down, calling them unreasonable and suggesting they came in looking to be offended. That was the moment the situation truly collapsed. Tim stepped closer, pointing out how often Jimmy dismissed their concerns by labeling them sensitive or dramatic. Jimmy snapped back, calling the whole thing ridiculous and a waste of time. Faith began unhooking her microphone, signaling there was no turning back. Jimmy warned them they couldn't just leave and claimed they'd never be welcome back. Faith laughed unfazed, saying she wouldn't want to return after how they'd been treated. Jimmy tried to justify the show's importance, but Tim countered that no platform was worth that level of disrespect. The confrontation had gone far beyond an awkward interview. It had become a public breakdown of trust, happening live, with no rewind button. Everyone in the studio knew they were witnessing something that would be replayed, analyzed, and debated for a long time. Jimmy accused them of throwing away a major promotional opportunity over hurt feelings. Faith corrected him, saying it wasn't about feelings but boundaries. Tim listed the ways Jimmy had attacked them, calling them unreasonable, suggesting they shouldn't do press, dismissing their concerns. Jimmy looked to the audience for support but found mixed reactions. The producer rushed back on stage, desperately trying to salvage the situation, asking for a commercial break. Faith refused. Tim explained that Jimmy had effectively told them they shouldn't be there, so they were simply honoring that. Jimmy tried to backtrack, saying he hadn't meant it that way. Faith asked him to explain what he had meant, right there, in front of everyone. Jimmy admitted he'd been frustrated and said something he shouldn't have. Tim pointed out that this interview was full of things he shouldn't have said, questioning when Jimmy would take responsibility for the pattern. Faith described his apologies as empty, saying he was sorry they were upset, not sorry for what he'd done. The producer suggested a pause again, but Faith said her head was clear for the first time all night. She understood exactly what this was and what it wasn't worth. With that, she and Tim turned to leave. The cameras kept rolling as the audience sat in stunned silence. Jimmy stood frozen, watching them walk off his stage. There was no laugh track, no music cue that could smooth this over. Just an uncomfortable, undeniable moment where a late-night format failed to contain real conflict. By the next day, clips were everywhere. Social media exploded with debate. Some viewers felt Jimmy crossed a line by bringing up internet rumors. Others believed Faith and Tim overreacted. But one thing was undeniable. This wasn't just another awkward interview. It was a raw example of how quickly banter can turn into something personal, and how poorly things can go when respect disappears. For Faith Hill and Tim McGraw, it became a public stand for boundaries. For Jimmy Fallon, it was one of the rare moments where his easygoing persona cracked on camera. And for viewers, it was a reminder that behind the smiles, jokes, and applause, live television can still deliver moments that no one can control once they start. Now it's your turn. After hearing everything that went down, whose side are you on?